Hello, everyone, and thanks again for joining us at the 2024 Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. My name is Jacob Harrison, and I'm a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan, and it's my pleasure to introduce our panel, Future of Football, Innovation on the Gridiron. Our panelists today are Paul Tudor Jones, co-chairman and chief investment officer of the Tudor Investment Corporation and co-founder of Sumer Sports, and Jonathan Kraft, president of the Kraft Group. Our panel will be moderated by Michelle Steele from ESPN. The panel will run for 45 minutes, and we'll leave 10 minutes at the end for audience questions. Please submit questions via our Cadence app. You can navigate to this panel via the schedule pane in the menu and navigate to the Future of Football Innovation on the Gridiron panel. Questions will be submitted in that event and then will be selected by the moderator. And with that, I'll turn it over to Michelle.
Great, thanks so much, Jacob. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Jonathan. Good morning, Paul. I think this is my 12th Sloan Analytics Conference. I didn't go to the first one, Jonathan, the first one that was in an MIT class. I think you went to that one.
I did. I'm old.
It's grown a lot just in the time that I've been going, and I've never had a panel this early in the morning, so I'm extremely enthusiastic about the turnout that we're seeing so far this morning. And full disclosure, I'm jet lagged. I was in the Philippines on a family vacation 2 days ago, so I'm very excited to be doing this at 8:30 in the morning and not 8:30 at night.
Good.
So we're going to talk about the most important, biggest sports league in this country, the National Football League. The National Football League, speaking of growth, has been in a period of certainly, you might even call it exponential growth, since your family bought the Patriots in 1995. And last few years, 93 of the top 100 most watched television broadcasts. Jonathan, you know what those are?
Yeah, they're NFL football games.
NFL football games. 5 international games are going to be played in 2024. We're seeing flag football in the Olympics. We're seeing a little bit more of a hockey stick growth trajectory for this sport, more in the years to come, and that's what we're going to talk about. And I'm very excited as well about Paul's business and the analytics that he's bringing to the table here as far as football is concerned. We talked, Jonathan, about the NFL being in a period of growth and change. I'm going to follow my journalistic instincts here and talk about your team in a period of growth and change, particularly this offseason. We've seen young coaches in the NFL have a lot of success, whether you're talking about Sean McVay or DeMeco Ryans, and you're going with a young coach in Gerard Mayo. Tell us why he's a good fit and what excites you about him.
Well, for us, we've been blessed. We had the greatest coach in football history for almost a quarter of a century as our coach. And in that period of time, we went from an old stadium that had been built for $6 million, and really the NFL, when Bill started coaching our team, was probably not yet the most popular sports league in America, to Gillette Stadium and a trajectory with the league and a game that evolved dramatically. And Bill was a guy who had been coaching in the 70s, and we were so lucky to have him and that wealth of experience and knowledge. And Bill had had so much success for such a long period of time, and so many of the young coaches underneath him had gone and moved out. For us, the building has always been about Bill and the football side of the building, and we've been blessed to be in that situation. I think when you transition from something like that in any business, you have to go in a very different direction, because nobody can be Bill Belichick. And in Gerard Mayo, you have a young man who grew up playing the game of football, played at Tennessee, was a first-round draft pick. Bill grew up the son of a coach, and Bill grew up on the coaching side. Gerard played the game. He played at the highest level in college, was a first-round draft pick. But even when he was a player as a rookie, he set himself apart. I remember being in the building one Saturday. It was like 6:30 in the morning. I had forgotten something. I was going on a trip, and I heard noise. It was like May in one of the football rooms, and I opened the door, and there was Gerard Mayo, like 3 weeks after being drafted at 6:30 in the morning, watching film. And I remember saying to him, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "You know, my college coach told me when you get to the NFL, it's a totally different game and it's a profession. And I'm not going to get by on my athleticism. I have to be smarter and better than everybody else at every aspect of the game." And I woke up this morning and I realized I could have turned on the TV and watched cartoons, or I could have come in and started working. And that work ethic coupled with he is a natural leader, and he has a high intellect. And the last thing I'll say is when he got out of football before coming back to coaching, he went to work at United Healthcare and thought very seriously about, and he was in their Optum Ventures group, which takes technology and brings it to healthcare to help revolutionize probably our country's most outdated major industry. And so when you take all of those characteristics together, coupled with the passion that he had because he decided he wanted to come back and coach football, you have somebody that's really probably well positioned for today's NFL. And in a lot of respects, because you would never do anyone justice if they were like Bill. He's the opposite, and I say that not negatively towards Bill. I just say it's the way you're going to change a culture that's been one way for a quarter of a century. It's a long answer. I apologize.
No apology needed here. I'm going to expect the same length of answers from you, Paul, coming up here in a few seconds. But you know, my assumption there is that he's continued that work ethic, Gerard Mayo, from his rookie year. My guess is that he's in the facility right now.
As a second-year player, he was a linebacker, stepped in as a rookie into a room that had Teddy Bruschi and Mike Vrabel. Two pretty strong personality, great leader, great football players. And his second year in the league, he was voted a team captain along being in a room like that. I think that speaks to his leadership capabilities.
You know, and by the way, did you say that the last stadium was $6 million?
Yeah.
With an M?
Yeah. That's built for 1971.
Does the lighthouse cost $6 million?
Lighthouse costs a little more than that.
This conference is all about unlocking value, right? Next year is going to mark the 25th anniversary of the most consequential sixth-round draft pick of all time, the start of the longest, most successful dynasty in the history of the NFL. Jonathan, what do you remember about drafting Brady in 2000?
You know, I remember my dad's down here too. It was Bill's first year and as head coach, and we had three quarterbacks on our roster. We had Drew Bledsoe, a guy named John Freese, who had been a starter in the league and was the strong backup. And we had drafted a kid the year before named Michael Bishop, who was an athletic, really dynamic football player, a very early version of what today is dominating in the league. And we had a lot of needs. We were not a good football team. And all I remember is, you know, my dad and I were sitting in the draft room, and in the fifth round, Brady was still there, and they talked about him briefly, and we just looked at each other. You know, we don't need a quarterback. They took a tight end named Dave Stachelski, who didn't last in the league at all. And in the sixth round, Bill, when we got a few picks away, said, "Why is Brady still there? That's just too much value." I think Bill knew. We had a coach named Dick Rabine, and they drafted Brady, and we carried him that year on the full roster because I think Bill understood if he went to the practice squad, somebody would have signed him. And today, most teams only carry two quarterbacks on their roster. The roster spots are too valuable. We carried four quarterbacks on the roster that whole year because I think there was an understanding there was something special about his intangibles.
Right, it wasn't lucking into the pick.
Well, we didn't need a quarterback. We had just given Drew $100 million, but I think, and I know Paul is in this business, and I should let Paul talk about it, but I think our guys saw him as just too much value sitting there in the sixth round at that position.
And you knew he had something special, and they kept him on as the fourth quarterback on the roster. Speaking of the ability to see things that others aren't, let's talk about analytics. I want to bring Paul into this discussion. You run a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund. You're the founder of the Robinhood Foundation. And you found time to lean into football analytics here with Sumer Sports. For the uninitiated in the audience, what is Sumer Sports and what are you aiming to do?
Sumer Sports is a sports analytics company that we founded 2 years ago. Football is our primary focus. Sumer's named after the first city in civilization, 4000 BC in Babylonia, that used measurement, that actually created the first mathematics to measure things. And so that's what we named ourselves after. The origin story is real simple, is I've loved football my whole life. I guess my first kind of miss in football was 1993. My uncle and I were the underbidders to Charlotte and Jacksonville the last time the NFL expanded. 2008, I nearly purchased the Dolphins from Wayne Huizenga. So I've loved football my whole life. That was 2 huge misses, I think. And I played fantasy football for 20 years. And the league I'm in is a cutthroat league where these son of a bitches watch football that's all they do in the weekend is watch football. I like to hunt and fish, and I hunt and fish every weekend. So needless to say, I've never won, and it really, really made me angry. And my son, God bless his soul, about 4 years ago said, Dad, I can win this thing for you. I can win this thing for you. And so 2 years, we were 4th and 5th, I think. And I told him, he was a stats major. He was just finishing up his last semester in stats because he's a football fanatic. I said, if you want to, the future of football is going to be data. It's pretty clear. It's going to be data analysis. It's transformed every single business in the world, and football is going to be one of them. I said, listen, if you're going to run my fantasy team, it's so clear in the fantasy draft that so much of it is about math. Forget even the forecast for the players. Once you start drafting and you're having to optimize every round depending upon who you drafted and what your vacancies are. I said, let's write the algorithm, Mr. Stats Major, and let's do an optimizer for fantasy so we can win this thing. Oh, Dad, if we do that, I drop out. Do you know how hard that'd be? Come on, Dad, I'd have to. There's no way I can do that. And needless to say, he dropped out, and here we are. And
have you won your fantasy league yet?
No. As a matter of fact, we haven't been able to put a model in fantasy yet because somewhere along the way we got diverted and decided we were going to build one for the NFL. And I thought naively that we could do this with 3 or 4 really bright people, and now today we are 20 data scientists, 20 engineers, 14-person scout team. We probably have more resources devoted to an NFL draft than any team by a multiple of 5. And if you said to me, what have I learned in those 2 years? Mickey Mantle famously said, it's amazing that I've played a sport for so long and it's taken me this long to understand how little I know. And I'd say what I've discovered over the past 2 years is, oh my gosh, this is the hardest human-created game, strategy game, ever created by man. By multiples, it's the hardest game ever created. And I'll say on the good side, it's kind of neat when your passion is also your vocation. And I would say most of the people at Sumer are passionate about figuring this out. So it's work, but it's not really. The best way to describe just how challenging football is, the analog I like to use is comparing football to chess. If you think about chess, you've got 16 players aside. Each of those players has the same superpower. A pawn is a pawn is a pawn. Queen is a queen, rook is a rook. Moving on 64 spaces, one player at a time, typically 35 moves in a game. Compare that to football. You have 11 players a side, but each of those players play on a 53 by 120 yard field with basically, after the whistle blows, unlimited maneuverability as opposed to one at a time. Each of those players do not have the same superpower. A quarterback is not a quarterback, it's not a quarterback. A tight end is not a tight end. And instead of moving sequentially one at a time, you have 22 players moving at the same time. So in chess, just to understand, in chess you have, again, 35 moves a game. In football, you have about 125 plays again. So just dimensionally, the number of possible games of chess that can be played is 10 to the 80th. 10 to the 80th, just to put that in context, is more than all the atoms, not on Earth, not in the solar system, not in the galaxy, but in the universe. So if chess is 10 to the 80th, what is football? And what I've learned now is, oh my gosh, I see why it's so easy to Monday morning quarterback or to backbench criticize coaches and GMs, because the search space is virtually infinite, right? It's literally virtually infinite. So where we are right now is, if I had to just to say this, is football has evolved. Football's, I think, started 1905, 1906. Originally, Teddy Roosevelt actually is the one who, as president, decreed the start of football. And then it was within about 5 or 6 years you had the first big evolution, which was the forward pass. Everyone thought, the forward pass. So football is, I think, in a linear basis, evolved over the past 100 and some odd years.
So
I think we're at the point where it's not going to be a linear evolution. We're going to have a nonlinear evolution, because analytics are going to play a huge role in football. Just one last thought. We get mesmerized in football by the fact that it's a gladiatorial sport. It's this beautiful, it's a series of duets, these incredible combative duets played simultaneously on every play. In actuality, you have these big personalities, you have high drama, people, huge celebrations, people crying, dejection. That masks the fact that at its basic core, football is every bit as much a math problem. Every bit as much. It's just we don't see it because we're diverted by the huge emotion and the athleticism around it. But putting those people in the right position, you can bet, has every bit as much important in determination of the outcome as the players themselves.
So Jonathan, listening to what Paul is saying, you know the intricacies and quite frankly the challenges of managing a roster and acquiring players and that kind of thing. Do you think that you can do that? You can operate roster management and acquisition essentially as a quant fund?
I don't think, and it's not what I do day to day, but I get to work with people who do it. And listening to Paul talk, I think he describes it very eloquently. The only thing I'd say is it's 11 on 11, but then during the course of the game, your 11 actually can be almost 22 on each side rather than 11, so that adds another layer of complexity. I think what you have to do is couple. Paul's explained how hard the math problem is, and I think as you start creating algorithms that help you take data sets, you can get outcomes that will help you inform your decision making. But at the end of the day, the coaches, the personnel people who've been around the game a long time have instinctual understanding of intangibles that are happening in the moment with the factual data set, and the real power comes when you put the two of them together. Now, historically, you've had to rely only on instincts and maybe perceptions that were created by the people who trained you. When Paul's at Sumer, as he continues to evolve that model, when you couple something like that with great instinctual capability, with human knowledge and awareness of things you can't put into zeros and ones, like passion and mental toughness and just things you've seen, then you're going to have an extremely powerful combination. And I think as a league, we're only scratching, I mean, we're not even scratching the surface. People say, oh, these teams have analytics departments. You can look at analytics around the cap and how to allocate dollars and make some general assumptions, but the real decision-making around personnel and around in-game decision-making, the potential of the power of coupling the two is really just at the beginning. You know, you're not even, the clock hasn't started ticking yet.
We know, Jessica is in the audience right now, we know that Kraft Sports Group has a very sophisticated approach to analytics when it comes to the business side of things. What is sort of the vision for the team approach, the football ops approach, as it relates to analytics in 2024?
Well, we're, as we talked about in the first question, entering a new phase. And we were so lucky to have Bill the last quarter century, as I said, because Bill has as good of a human set of algorithms as you can have, as a human being can have in their head. And we benefited from that. And Bill was so good and so much better than his competition at those things that we didn't evolve it on the technical side. We talked about our new leadership. I think they, as I said, Gerard worked at Optum Ventures, which is the division of United Healthcare that was bringing technology to traditional healthcare to try to evolve that business. And I think you'll see us with Gerard and Elliot Wolf and Matt Groh, who are running our football operations, start to bring more traditional analytic tools. We have them on our business side. We will start to bring them to the football side now.
Yeah, Elliot Wolf has said that he's going to change, I think, the grading system to reflect a little bit of what worked in Green Bay. What has Elliot told you sort of about his approach? And, you know, it's not just about the Packer way versus the Patriot way, is it?
Yeah, no, I think what Elliot would say is we had a grading system internally that worked really well and fit the way Bill wanted to manage a football team, which had started again. Bill was basing that off of something, a foundation he got watching film with his dad, you know, in the 1960s at Navy, and it really worked for a long time. But the game and the way most people are looking at it and grading players had evolved to a system that was just different than that. And without getting into all the details, we're going to bring a system that the people that are now running our football operation believe better fits today's NFL and the way people like to scout and evaluate players.
Jonathan, you brought up intangibles. Paul, the Steelers' former GM this week, was talking a little bit about intangibles. I'm not sure if you saw his quote. Not high on analytics, not an analytics guy, saying that they're being overused in the NFL, that analytics are being overused. He said, I would tell the analytics people, when you guys can measure the intangibles, let me know.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
How does Sumer measure the intangibles, and if so, how?
Well, you have to realize that when any human makes a decision, every single one of those decisions, someone's quantifying in their mind those intangibles, right? When you make a decision, your internal brain is going through the mental math to help you say yes or no, go or stay, choose this over that. So you're already making that. The beauty of analytics are, there are three things that analytics bring. First of all, I have a really strong belief that you can numerize everything. Everything can be turned, every opinion can be turned into a number. It requires rigor and it requires process, but when you make a decision, you're doing that already. The
leadership can be a number, smarts can be a number.
Absolutely. The psychographics are it's a nascent field, but it's a very important field. And certainly, I kind of look at it where you're always going to find instances where a human can outcompete a model. But if you look at the tide of history, oh my Lord, why are we where we are today? It's because of the fact that we've been able to either digitize or numerize virtually everything. It's why the 7 biggest companies in the world are tech companies, because they've relied on data and math to get where they are today. So what I would say is that if you think about what a model does, it's extraordinarily rigorous and process driven. The first advantage the model has is that it's comprehensive. It sits down and takes every possible variable there is on player selection and lists them out. So it's comprehensive. The second thing it does is it's transparent. Okay, you believe this about his intangible mental toughness. I believe that. We've got to drive to an organizational value in the draft so that we have an idea of what the Patriots think about that person's mental toughness. So it's transparent. So that variable, mental toughness, everyone's going to be able to assign what their weighting is to that person's mental toughness based on, it may have a whole bunch of variables and models below that. We have 20 big models with God knows how many submodels and variables that go into it that feed into our overall player selection model. And then the third thing that an algorithm does is it brings accuracy. So once you have your forecast of all these different things that go into a particular player, then it's a question of summing up all those with their grades, their weightings, et cetera, summing them all up and coming out with how do I optimize in the draft or in player selection in a rapidly shrinking universe, which causes me to re-optimize every time the available players left relative to the vacancies that I have. And so that accuracy is just math. And of course, the reality is that today an algorithm is going to be able to compute 1,000,000 times faster than a human. We've kind of seen that everywhere. Think about chess. Again, I want to go back to that. 10 to the 80th, an infinite search space. There's not a human being today, not a grandmaster, that can even remotely compete or beat a chess model. It was funny because in 1993, when I saw 1990, I guess it was 1997 actually, that Deep Blue beat the first grandmaster beat Gary Kasparov in that series. The first thing I did was I went out and hired 2 of the best players on Deep Blue's team to come build that same tool for me internally in my hedge fund. I still use it today. I spend hours and hours and hours of every day on a tool that takes all the macro variables and all the things that I'm trading and helps and gives me and guides me what to do. What we built at Sumer, we call it Marvel, which is maximize roster value. It's a model that I think will be every GM's friend. Do you know the average lifespan of a GM today is 3.5 years?
Their career.
Their career. And why is it 3.5 years? Because, again, chess really talks about in-game play. If you go to player selection, our guess is that, again, the search space on that, like in-game play, player selection is probably, we're at a minimum, it's probably 10 to the 40th. And you could argue it's up to 10 to the 170th or 180th. It just depends on what quant you want to quibble with. But again, it can be the GM's best friend, because with that model, at every single selection, you'll be able to talk to your owner and you can say, it's very simple why we chose this person, because you'll go through all the metrics, all the weightings, all your internal IP, and say, here's what the math said. Maybe the selections are so close that they're indeterminate. So Well, we just went with this guy because he's from Boston, and it's going to help us sell more tickets because in reality, the error bar was so tiny it made no difference. But it's going to be a GM's best friend, and they're going to go from living 3.5 years on average. With that model, they should be there forever. It'll be a president's best friend of a football organization because I think it'll save, in terms of personnel costs, I think it can save millions for each team. And then finally, it could be an owner's best friend because you're going to cut your dead cap by. You're never going to cut it because of injuries, but where you made a mistake because of the math, or you didn't get your forecast right, or you didn't use the math with your forecast correctly, it's going to cut your dead cap space in half.
Do you think that teams are going to want to share their internal IP with a third party?
Well, it's funny. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Do you know, are you asking Paul or me?
Well, you smiled, so.
I only smiled because Paul and I have talked about that. Go ahead, you should answer it.
Well, I was going to say, it's funny, we started out 2 years ago when we started the company. I thought, wow, we're a football company because we love football. And 2 years later, I kind of feel like we're V2, which I think is really, really good, but I don't know if we're where we need to be yet on our model. I think by next year for sure we'll be there. It's kind of like ChatGPT 1, 2, 3, 4. Windows 95 was the third version. But I realize now we're a tech and software company first and foremost. And I was talking to someone, and someone that we're probably going to hire, and I said, you know, the clubs are really freaky about their data. And she said to me, you know, it's funny because we work with 7 different departments within the Department of Defense, and if I can fix it for them, then certainly I can create an environment where clubs' IP is 100% safe. And so that to me is a trifle.
And I would just add, and Paul and I talked about that, no team is going to ever be able to make the investment or have the managerial skills to hire the data scientists and the software engineers that Paul talked about that they have at the start. So that main consumer product, for simplicity's sake, we'll call it a piece of, like SaaS. That's made, the algorithms and the model that it spits out at his end with his data sets, but where you want to customize it team by team with your own data and your own perception of what you've seen, that has to sit in a secure environment that is only accessible to your club. When Paul and I were talking, he acknowledged that was an issue from when they first started the company, and it's why he's really transitioned it to this software tech model rather than football model, because no one says to Oracle or to SAP or to Salesforce, I'm worried about the privacy, the security of my own IP. And I think that was a really great revelation on his part, because that will allow teams to start to use something like this, because there is no tool out there today for us to really go deep in art, for lack of a better term, it really is artificial intelligence that's going to aid the clubs in making decisions. I would disagree or respectfully say that I think digitizing intangibles, though, if you have a big enough data set, you can do it. And that's the only thing I worry about. I don't know that, given that you're looking at, a few thousand players a year coming out in college, and then a couple hundred of them will really make it in the league, so you can track and quantify. It'll take a long time, I think, to be able to really digitize intangibles. It's a process. You should comment on that. That would be the only thing I would disagree with.
So if you said to me in player selection, what is the Achilles heel in player selection, I would say it's psychographics. And I say that because if you look at all the psychological testing, and we've looked at all of them, that all companies use for employee selection, if you look at it, it's really hard to find one that stands out as a test that's cut and dry. You have small edges, and particularly in certain occupations, there's small edges. There really are, and so I would say that part is the hardest part when it comes for the forecast for player selection, no question. But again, let's assume that you and I are, let's say you're the owner and I'm the GM, and we're trying to figure out between two players. And let's say that everything else is exactly the same, and we have a differing view, and we respect each other 50%. We have a differing view on the psychological profile of this particular player. You'd still want to numerize the distinction that we have. Like if you think, gosh, I think he's just a little better than the next player, and I said, no, I think this other person is a lot better than that player. You'd want to be able to say, okay, well, on that belief, I'm a 6 and you're a 9, so, or I'm a 6 on this player and I'm a 9 on that player. We still would say, let's quantify the distinction in our opinions to come up with an organizational value so that together we have come through and made a very explicit decision as to the way we do it. One thing that we're doing in the players model that we have is that we are capturing the data that, for instance, your scouts will have and be able to rank those scouts and their predictive ability over time. So you'll always have a qualitative understanding of where the particular forecast comes from. So again, at the end of the day, can I just say, the reason I'm such a fanatical about this, I've lived this before. I started on the floor as a commodity trader in the 1980s. There were 100,000 people in that industry that were just like me. We were making decisions on what to buy and sell every day. We were the heart and the liquidity provider and the decision makers in futures markets all over the world, from Sydney to Kansas City, to Chicago, to New York, to Frankfurt, Paris, London. Beginning about the early 90s, all of a sudden they started this thing called electronic trading, where they were numerizing all the things that we were doing, all the beliefs, the opinions, the intangibles, all the things that we thought with regard to what constitutes a price at any particular moment. And then within the blink of an eye, literally the blink of an eye, a small handful of incredibly brilliant people who numerized all the things that went around to making those prices. And remember, those prices are reflections of everything from people's emotions, belief systems, data, opinions, you name it, the same things that go into player selection. Within the blink of an eye, those algorithms had completely, totally supplanted humans and made those people who adopted a really rigorous process-driven decision-making approach to decision-making, pretty much they dominated the industry. And you've got people who did that worth tens of billions of dollars. So I've seen this story before. I've actually lived it. The good news was in the 90s, I saw what was coming. And even though I didn't have a degree in math or computer science or data science, I pivoted very quickly and tried to learn what I didn't know. And it's the reason why I am where I am today. What I would say is, for the students that are in this audience, and those of you that love football, I will bet you have a tremendous future in this sport, because it's the most complex game. And the analytics and the analysts and the people who will be, again, bringing this process-driven way of making decisions in the toughest mental game in the world, they're going to have a really prominent role to play in the future of successful football teams.
You know, when you say you're a commodities trader in the 80s, I have to resist the urge to ask whether you traded frozen orange juice futures, like in Trading Places.
Okay, now you're getting in trouble.
Yeah,
I
had a hot tip for us?
so the highlight of my life was that was filmed in the orange juice pit. I was a member. I was supposed to be in the movie, but instead, while the movie was being filmed, I interviewed for Futures Magazine Dan Aykroyd about what he thought about that movie. And I think I was 20, 25, 20. I thought I was the greatest, the hottest thing in the world. I'm talking to Dan Aykroyd.
Think about how rich you'd be today if you had the residuals from that, though. Think about what you lost out on.
But you know, let's talk brass tacks here about Sumer. For a team that's like, you know, 8-9, right? And they sign with you guys. What are you telling them that they can do the next year? 1 win, 2 wins? More?
What I can tell them is that there will be, and you have to realize the model can do the work for you, but it really requires the club. It's the club's IP that's so critical. We take them through a process where we go through and we try to understand and get them to tell us the positional. First of all, who are the players that you have on offense and defense? So we go through and we create a custom model for their offense and defense. And then we ask them, let's weight the position of those particular players. And we weight that weighting scheme. And then we go through and we start taking a compilation of their grades. And we take their grades and we change them into a grading systems that we use so that all we've done is just interpolated those numbers and we change them into that so that we have a basic grading system. So you have positional weights, grading system, and then we have injury forecast and snap count. How many snaps, which a lot of it is depth, a lot of it is also the injury forecast. What's your snap count? Now we have a forecast for a player. Once you have a forecast for on-field performance, then it's with their IP. By the way, that's all their IP, germane in particular to their team. Once you have that forecast, when you get to the draft, it's real simple. What are your vacancies? What are your forecasts? What are the available players? What are the forecasts for those players? And then if you think about the draft, it's a shrinking universe where you have to re-optimize on every selection, depending upon what you selected, as well as what other teams have selected. So you're re-optimizing, doing millions of optimizations like this every time. And the great news is with the model is it's going to give you what should be your optimal pick based on your IP at any point in the draft.
And presumably improve the win column.
Pardon?
Presumably improve the win column for those teams.
So, presumably.
Right. Or your money back guaranteed.
Yes, if nothing else, you'll be able, if you're a GM, you'll be able to explain to the owner, the fans, your coaches, and obviously your coaches should be involved in those forecasts, particularly on positional importance because it's their scheme. You'll say, this is why we did that. And it's transparent and it's clear, it's process driven, and it's rigorous.
It is a bold bet, and we wish you the best of luck with Sumer Sports. We have some great questions coming in from the audience. Now, Paul, what's your buy-in for your fantasy football league? I've never seen a spit take at Sloan, and that was a real one. That's great.
The buy-in is $100,000, and we take all the profits and give it to charity. And I am so tired of losing. I'm about to blow my brains out. But at some point, we're going to get to building a model for fantasy. That'll be one of our B2C products. And it'll be, oh my gosh, what an edge that'll be. And it's so funny because all the people in my league, they call us the machine. And of course, the machine didn't do well this year. And it was just like every Sunday was just such a beating for me. Oh my God. Because we didn't have a model, and it was just my son and I, and we had some injuries and a variety of other things. And it just was, the machine, the machine. Because they've been hearing about this for 2 years. So it's been a bit of a challenge, which I'm embarrassed to say.
Speaking of injuries, Paul, tell us how your model accounts for Rodgers or any player going down. How does your model take into account availability?
Yeah, you have to think about this model. I look at it. I look at the model like the probabilities around a casino. If I had to say what most GMs are, they're the players at a casino. So you walk in, and I have within just the same way a casino has all these different games with all these different outcomes. The casino has a 5% edge, at least, in every one of them. I think the only free bet in the casino's coming out in Kraft. Otherwise, they have a 5 to 15%. It's just you're gonna ultimately get beaten. There's always going to be times when a human is going to outperform an algorithm. You're going to always have that. But if you think about, again, just the number of different variables, the number of different models, probably you're going to have that algorithm over time is going to have enough edge that when you sum up all those edges, it becomes something that's going to dominate day in, day out, year in, year out. So as far as injuries go, you're going to just go back. You're going to look at that person's age. You're going to use an aging curve. You're going to look at their injury history, and you're going to probably just use averages. You're going to do something like averages. You're going to then overlay it with, you're going to have a whole bunch of people who say they can forecast by looking at the musculoskeletal system. You're going to take in every possible thing there is, but at the end of the day, injuries can be so catastrophic external, and they're so episodic that it's really hard to do anything but use the averages and just hope for the best.
Jonathan, given the availability of data and analytics, do you see a time where the GM goes away?
No.
And teams rely on AI and machine learning to draft their team? That's a no.
Not going to be in my lifetime. Machine learning is a tool for the experienced, capable GM or whoever's running that side of the house to put to work to make the best decisions. When you've got financial trading in markets being done by computers, the volume of trades and the liquidity and scale of the market, it's so different. These are very meticulous one-off decisions in building what is ultimately a 53-man roster. And I think over time, the tools like Sumer will probably become a bigger factor for very capable personnel managers. And I will say this, I think the very capable people who, if you go back in recent history, grew up as pure football people, I think they're going to be more well-rounded people. They're going to understand the game of football, they're going to know how to scout, but they're not going to be hardcore technical football scouts because they wouldn't have been able to develop the other skills you're going to need. You're going to need to understand how models work, how to weight different factors, how to take a tool like Sumer and weight it for however you want to run and build your team and what factors might be more important to you. Because coaches and general managers each have different philosophies about how they want to run a team. If you look at a team, you know, like the Kansas City Chiefs, I'm just pulling these out of the hat, so please don't, I'm not remotely criticizing anybody. But if you look at a team like the Chiefs and how it's built, and if you look at a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers, they're two NFL football teams, two historically very successful teams, but they have a different philosophy around team building. And that's the part that the general manager and the head coach will take tools like Sumer and tweak it to their needs. But I do think general managers over time won't have come up as just hardcore, regional scouts, scouting directors, and ultimately moving up to general manager. And I think more and more people diminish the importance of the salary cap, but I'll tell you, understanding how to structure contracts to give yourself the ultimate flexibility while making the right decisions is also extremely important.
Can I just add, I agree with him 100%. I don't think the model will ever replace the human, particularly in football. I don't think there's enough observations for it to do that. Having said that, I think it can be the GM's best friend because, again, it brings rigor and process to a really
accountability.
Accountability.
Which is never.
Yes.
Yep.
Can I tell a quick story? Because
Yes.
when we first got into the business, I remember, and we fully acknowledged we didn't know what we were doing, but we said we wanted to take all of the scouting reports for the prior 5 years and look at how all of the players that the various scouts had scouted and how they had performed in their time in the NFL so that we could determine which of our scouts was better and wasn't. And our football people at the time told us we didn't know what we were talking about, that there was too much variability and you couldn't really and we weren't even going to use a computer to do it. It was effectively going to be, we might have had a spreadsheet, like in Lotus 1, 2, 3 or something. And the football people at the time didn't want the accountability being brought to bear, like, you won't understand, we can't do this. And I think what Paul's talking about right now is being able to have that accountability, which is also going to be very important. I apologize, but historically they haven't wanted it, and I think a big part of it is they were afraid of the technology and didn't understand it.
Paul, your model seems totally focused on fit rather than best available. That seems the opposite of a hedge fund. Is focus on fit driven by win now, infrequency of trades, or something else altogether?
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with the premise of that question. The way our model works is, particularly in the draft, you can optimize. We're actually also building, which hopefully we'll have available next February, what we call a scenario builder, which will allow you to, for free agency in the draft, optimize to fill your vacancies between free agency and the draft. You can turn everything to optimize for next year's win, or you can say, I want to have a 2 or a 3 year horizon, because that's kind of the length of a rookie contract, and I want to optimize through time. So the model's flexible enough to give you the ability to determine whether you want to win now or win in the future. It's just a question of, again, if you wanted to win now, we saw the Los Angeles Rams do it a couple years back. You trade away all your draft picks, you go hard in free agency. So the model's flexibility and allows the GM, the owner, the coach, again, it brings that transparency to say, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to win next year, or are we trying to win for the long term?
And we'll do just a lightning round here to get to the last few questions. Jonathan, how important is it for you as the Patriots transition from top team in the league for 20 years to a rebuilding young squad? How important is it for you as a leader to remain consistent in your approach regardless of outcome?
I don't, consistent in approach, I'm going to assume it means overall managerial approach. I think you have to be consistent as a leader. I think inconsistency makes it very hard for an organization to perform. The people that work with you need to understand what's important to you and culturally what matters to your organization. But I would say we're not setting the tone for the football department. That would be our the person running personnel and the head coach.
What are some of the metrics, Paul, that are undervalued at the NFL Combine?
I'm going to pass on that one.
Jonathan, what did you think of Tom Brady's 40-yard dash this week?
Nothing Tom Brady does surprises me. I think he'll probably beat his.
He beat it.
He beat his combine 40 time from 20 whatever years ago this past week. And I would bet that at 65, he'll beat his 40 time because he is that extraordinary of a human being.
We're going to throw down the gauntlet there.
Can I just go back? I think, I go back to psychographics, those particular qualities. If you think about Tom Brady, why was he so incredible? Well, yes, he had great technical skills as a quarterback. He was very accurate, but what really set him apart, and I think was a big part of why the Patriots won all those Super Bowls. If you take football and break it down its four component parts, it's player selection, performance enhancement, how do I get the most out of my players mentally and physically, play design, and then in-game play, which is the chess part of it. Brady was a great talent physically, but he also went into performance enhancement because his work ethic got the rest of the team to dedicate themselves to what they could do. And then also in talent selection, he attracted players like Randy Moss to come play with him. So in talent selection, you'd have to give him a nonlinear rating on leadership because he was able to improve the other players because he attracted additional talent. So you can't do 0 to 10 when ranking a player. There has to be a nonlinear way to go past that because you have these extraordinary players that have tails associated with them that are worth more than the best player in that on a normal scale, normal ranking.
Gentlemen, this was a fascinating conversation. I can't wait to have you back, Paul, to talk about how you beat the pants out of everybody in your fantasy league next year. Thank you, everybody, for listening in, and enjoy the rest of the conference.